For 500 years, humanity has lived underground, buried beneath the ashes of a world it once ruled. The surface, a wasteland poisoned by nuclear fire, spoken of only in whispers. But now, the doors are opening, and what waits beyond them is not the world we left behind. They thought Earth was dead. They were wrong. Something survived out here, and it's been waiting. For 500 years, humanity had lived in the depths of the earth, cocooned in towering silos that stretched downward instead of skyward. The underground bunkers had been designed to outlast the nuclear fires that had once scoured the surface, a sanctuary turned prison over generations. Within these cold steel walls, life had persisted in predictable cycles, dictated by the hum of machines and the glow of artificial light. Claire had never known any different. Like her parents and their parents before them, she had been born into a world of concrete tunnels and recycled air. The idea of the surface had always been little more than a myth, whispered in the hushed tones of dreamers and fools. Yet myths had suddenly become reality. After centuries of uncertainty, the radiation levels had finally dropped to safe levels. The governing council had decided it was time. The first exploration team would set foot onto the surface and discover where the earth had truly healed. The moment the announcement had rung through the silo, Claire had felt an electric jolt of purpose. She had trained for this her entire life, mastering every discipline required for the journey. Biology, survival tactics, historical recon. The unknown had always called to her, louder than the rules and fears that had bound others to the safety of the underground. When the council had asked for volunteers, she had stepped forward without hesitation, and now she stood at the threshold of history. The airlock loomed before them, its massive steel doors marked with centuries of wear. A hush fell over the small team of explorers as the mechanisms groaned to life, gears grinding with the effort of movement, unseen for half a millennium. Claire's pulse pounded as the thick doors shuddered and parted, revealing the world beyond. A gust of wind rushed into the silo, unfiltered and wild. It carried with it the scent of soil, water, and something else, something ancient and untouched. Claire gasped as the sunlight struck her face, warm and golden. Unlike anything she had ever known, she had read about the sun, seen faded images of it in the archives, but nothing could have prepared her for its brilliance. Tears blurred her vision as she took her first breath of open air, tasting the crispiness of an atmosphere free of mechanical regulation. The world outside was both familiar and alien. Crumbling ruins stretched across the landscape, the bones of civilization long past. Towers of steel and glass, once symbols of human ambition, stood hollow and broken, their surfaces consumed by creeping vines and moss. Nature had reclaimed the land in humanity's absence, weaving itself through the skeletons of cities, filling the cracks of roads, now blanketed in grass. Trees had taken root in places where asphalt once stretched endlessly, their roots bursting through concrete, like veins in the skin of a living world. Claire and her team stepped forward, their boots crunching over debris, shattered glass, rusted metal, and remnants of lives frozen in time. Cars sat abandoned, their frames corroded and interiors swallowed by plant life. Street signs hung lopsided, their messages weathered to near illegibility. The silence was profound, broken only by the rustling wind and the distant cry of unseen birds. For a moment, all held them in all its grasp. The world was neither the wasteland they had feared, nor the paradise they had hoped for. There was something in between, something reborn. But as Claire gazed deeper into the ruined landscape, a shiver ran down her spine. The surface was not lifeless. Shadows shifted among the ruins, figures moving beneath the husks of buildings. Something had survived here too. The ascent had begun, but so had the unknown. The initial euphoria of discovery had not yet worn off when the team moved deeper into the ruins. Their mission was clear: find anything of value. Despite centuries of decay, there were still remnants of the past that could aid their survival. Canned foods, tools, medical supplies, and, if they were fortunate, working technology. Every piece of salvage mattered, not just for their small team, but the countless lives still waiting below the earth. Claire led the way into what had once been a supermarket. The structure was mostly intact, though its glass windows had long since shattered, allowing vines to creep inside. The shelves were picked clean, stripped by time and desperate hands long before them. Still, faded labels clung to rusted cans, and fragments of old packaging whispered stories of a bygone era. A sense of wonder filled the group as they explored. Laughter echoed softly when Jonah, their tech specialist, held up a long-expired candy bar as if it was a relic of untold value. "Think this still tastes like chocolate?" he mused. Claire allowed herself a rare smile. Only one way to find out. For a moment, the tension of their mission lifted. They weren't explorers stepping into the unknown. They were children discovering a lost world. But the illusion was short-lived. A sound too faint for the others to notice, but sharp enough to raise the hairs on Claire's neck, drifted through the supermarket. A shuffle of movement, the soft crunch of debris underfoot. She turned toward the entrance, just as the first figure lunged from the shadows. A sharp cry rippled through the air as their assailants struck with brutal efficiency. The nomads, ragged and hardened by a lifetime in the wasteland, moved like wraiths, emerging from the ruins as if they had been a part of them all along. Their clothes were mismatched, scavenged from the past, reinforced with bone and scrap metal. Their faces streaked with dirt were unreadable, radiated a primal hunger. They came for everything. Claire barely had time to react before she felt the weight of a body crash into her, knocking her to the floor. A knee pressed against her chest, forcing the air from her lungs. Her hands clawed for her knife, but rough fingers wrenched it from her grasp. Shouts filled the space, her team struggling, some fighting back, others overwhelmed too quickly. Weapons clattered to the ground, boots pounded against shattered tiles. Claire thrashed, but the attacker was stronger, hardened by a life she had never known. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The team was left gasping, sprawled across the floor, their hands empty, their bodies aching. The nomads had taken everything: food, weapons, protective suits. Even their emergency radios were gone, leaving them with no way to contact the silo. One of the nomads, a tall woman with a scar running down her cheek, stood over Claire. "You're not the first to come crawling out of the ground," she said, voice low and edged with disdain. "But you'll learn what it really means to survive." With that, the nomads melted back into the ruins, vanishing as swiftly as they had come. Silence followed. Claire pushed herself up, her ribs throbbing, her breath coming in short gasps. The others were shaking, some nursing bruises, others staring numbly at the empty space where the supplies had been. Jonah swore under his breath, "We're dead out here." Claire clenched her fists, fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve, but she forced it down. They weren't dead. Not yet. They had a choice: return to the silo in disgrace, empty-handed and defeated, or fight back. And Claire had never been one to surrender. The cold bite of defeat lingered in Claire's chest, but she refused to let it take root. She had spent her whole life dreaming of the surface, yearning for the freedom it promised. She will not let the first taste of hardship send her running back underground. The nomads had their supplies, but they did not have everything. They did not have Claire's mind. The silo had preserved more than human life. Within its digital archives lay the knowledge of countless generations, tactics, strategies, survival techniques. Claire had studied them all. She had memorized the patterns of ancient warfare, the art of tracking, the science of reclaiming lost ground. The nomads may have lived on the surface for generations, but they survived by instinct, by brute force. Claire had something they didn't: a plan. She gathered the team in the ruins of a collapsed building, the skeletal remains of its walls shielding them from view. Jonah nursed a bruised wrist, his face pale with frustration. "We can't win against them," he muttered. "They know this world better than we do." Claire shook her head. "They know how to survive in it. We know how to think." Her eyes swept across their surroundings, searching for the patterns that would reveal their enemies' movements. The nomads vanished as swiftly as they had appeared, but they had left behind traces, footprints in the dust, snapped twigs where they had rushed through the overgrown streets, an empty food wrapper carelessly discarded. The city, for all its ruin, was a map. Claire only had to read it. The trail led them through the husks of old buildings, past rusted vehicles and streets cracked open by time. Hours passed as they followed the signs, each step drawing them closer to their prey. Then at the edge of what had once been a grand plaza, they found it. the nomads' camp. It was a crude settlement built within the shell of an old high-rise. Fires burned in rusted barrels, casting flickering shadows against the walls. Makeshift barricades blocked off entrances, fashioned from the old furniture and debris. The nomads moved within, laughing, eating, guarding their stolen bounty with a sense of ease that made Claire's blood boil. She watched from a distance, analyzing. There were sentries, but they were careless, their attention shifting between their own conversations and the darkness beyond. They thought the explorers were beaten. That was their mistake. Claire turned to her team, lowering her voice. "We don't fight them head on. We strike like the ghosts of the old world." They waited until nightfall. The darkness became their ally, cloaking their movements as they crept toward the camp. Claire signaled, and they split into positions. Jonah and Mira took the outer perimeter, cutting the ropes, securing the stolen gear. Claire and Aaron moved toward the fires, where the nomads carelessly left their supplies unguarded. One by one, they reclaimed what was theirs. Then, just as they were slipping back into the shadows, a nomad stirred. His eyes widened as he spotted Claire, his mouth opening to shout. Claire moved on instinct. She lunged, slamming her hand over his mouth, driving him down. The struggle was brief, silent. When she rose, her breath was unsteady, but her hands were steady. She had done what needed to be done. The team vanished into the ruins before the alarm could be raised. By dawn, they had regrouped, their stolen supplies safely back in their hands. They had won, but Claire knew the battle was far from over. The surface was no longer just a place to explore, it was a battlefield, and if they wanted to claim it as their home, they would have to be ready for war. The firelight flickered against the broken walls of their makeshift camp, casting long shadows across the worn faces of Claire and her team. Their stolen supplies sat in neat piles behind them. Food, water, medical kits, even a few weapons pried from the careless hands of the nomads. The victory had been hard fought, but it had come at a cost. The encounter had opened their eyes to the brutal truth of the surface. It was not a new world waiting to be claimed. It was a battlefield. The question now hung between them like a sword of some ancient ruler, ready to fall and cut their fate in two. Do we go back, or do we stay? Jonah was the first to speak, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We need to return. We barely made it through one ambush, and that was against a ragtag group of scavengers. What happens when we run into something worse? There's no shame in going home." Aaron, the team's most level-headed member, nodded. "The silo is safety. We have families down there, people waiting for us. We weren't sent to claim the surface, just to explore it." Claire clenched her fists. Every word felt like a chain tightening around her throat. "And what if we go back and never get the chance to return?" she countered. "You think the council is just going to send another expedition after we tell them what we found? No, they'll lock the doors and decide it's too dangerous." Mira, who had been silent until now, let out a slow breath. "So what? We just stay out here and hope for the best? We don't have the numbers to build anything. We don't even know if we'll survive the next attack." Claire looked around at them, her friends, her comrades. Their faces bore the marks of exhaustion, fear, doubt. But beneath it all, she saw something else. The same fire that burned within her. They didn't want to go back. Not really. They just didn't know how to stay. Then fate made the decision for them. While scouting the outer ruins, Claire stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. At first, she thought it was just another crumbling structure, a squat, rectangular building buried beneath the overgrowth. But as she stepped closer, she saw the insignia on the rusted steel door. It was a government bunker. With trembling hands, she pushed open the entrance. A rush of stale air greeted her, but beyond the dust and darkness, what she saw made her heart pound. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with supplies untouched for centuries. Canned goods, medicine, water purifiers, even old-world technology still sealed in protective cases. And then she saw something else. Records, maps, journals detailing past attempts to reclaim the surface. Handwritten notes from survivors who had come before them. People who had believed that Earth could be home again. Some entries spoke of hope, others of failure. But one thing was clear. They had not been the first to dream of rebuilding. Claire ran back to the group, her excitement barely contained. "We can't go back," she said. "Not yet. I found something. Proof that others tried before us. Supplies, information. If we use it, we might have a real chance." The team followed her to the bunker, their doubts cracking as they took in what she had discovered. The air in the shelter was heavy with the ghosts of the past. but it was also filled with possibility. Jonah let out a low whistle. This changes everything. Aaron nodded slowly, eyes scanning the maps. We could actually prepare, not just survive, thrive. For the first time since stepping into the surface, they weren't just fighting to stay alive. They were fighting for a future. The decision was made. They would return to the silo, but not to hide, not to surrender. They would return to gather others, to share what they had found and bring back those who were willing to risk everything for the chance at something greater. Because the surface was not just a dangerous wasteland, it was home. The journey back to the silo was far quieter than their ascent to the surface. Gone was the eager anticipation, the blind hope of discovery. In its place was something heavier, knowledge. They had seen the sky, felt the wind, and walked upon the ruins of the world their ancestors had left behind. And though it had been cruel, though it had tried to swallow them whole, it had also whispered a promise. There is life here. When they reached the massive steel doors of the silo, Claire hesitated. Only days ago this threshold had been a portal to the unknown, an exit into the world she had never touched. Now it felt like the edge of a prison cell. The doors hissed open as they stepped inside. The artificial light of the silo deemed dim compared to the brilliance of the sun they had left behind. The air, clean and controlled, now felt sterile. The walls, once reassuring in their solid familiarity, now pressed inward like a cage. Claire wasn't the only one who felt it. The others walked in silence, their boots echoing through the corridors, the reality of the underground life hitting them harder than it had before. It wasn't just that they had changed, it was that they had grown, and this place had not. News of their return spread quickly, the first team to breach the surface and return alive. It was a story too incredible to ignore. The people of the silo, accustomed to the hum of the machines and the cycle of routine, gathered in clusters to hear the tale. And when they heard, they began to hope. Claire saw in their eyes the same spark that ignited within her the moment she had stepped onto the surface. For centuries, the idea of the outside world had been nothing more than a ghost story, a warning passed down to keep them content with their underground existence. But now there was proof. The surface was not just a wasteland, it was a home waiting to be reclaimed. The council summoned them almost immediately, the elders of the silo, those who had spent their lives keeping humanity safe beneath the earth, listened with cautious skepticism. Some were intrigued, others were afraid. It's too dangerous, one of them warned. You barely survived. We were unprepared, Claire countered. Now we know what's out there. We know how to fight, how to survive. The world is not the same as it once was, another council member argued. How can you be so sure it's worth the risk? Claire met his gaze, unwavering. Because staying down here isn't living, it's waiting to die. Silence fell over the chamber. The decision was not made in a single meeting. There were debates, arguments, fear, but there was also something stronger, curiosity, a longing for something more. Preparations began. Those who were willing trained in combat, in survival, in old world sciences that had once been dismissed as unnecessary. They gathered supplies, mapped out potential settlements, planned for a future in a world that had once belonged to them. Claire stood at the heart of it all. The fire in her chest burned brighter than ever. She had stepped onto the surface as an explorer, but she was returning to it as a leader. It wouldn't be easy. The world was still wild, still dangerous. The nomads were out there, and who knew what else lurked in the ruins of the old world. But for the first time in 500 years, humanity was not hiding. They were rising, and the surface was waiting.